The waters of this lake may be peaceful today, but in the early 19th century, they were filled with battleships, cannons ablaze, during one of the most important naval battles in United States history. Today, thousands of bikers roar right through South Dakota's Black Hills during the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally. But in the early 20th century, there were very few good roads, which meant it was hard to get here at all. That's why South Dakota State historian Dwayne Robinson wanted to build a monument that could lure tourists to this wondrous landscape. When he saw this group of now famous granite spires, known as the Needles, he imagined using them to carve giant portraits of heroes of the American West. Heroes like Lewis and Clark, Buffalo Bill Cody, and the great Sioux chief Red Cloud, who had fought and died to keep the Black Hills off limits to miners, settlers, and even the kind of tourists Robinson hoped to attract. But when Danish-American sculptor Gutzon Borglum saw the Needles, he wasn't convinced they would be suitable for large-scale carvings, and told Robinson he feared they would end up looking like misplaced totem poles. But he soon found another location just a few miles away that he thought would be perfect. A giant wall of solid granite, big enough for multiple carved portraits, each up to 6 stories tall. There was, he declared, no piece of granite comparable to it in the United States. He also thought that a national tribute to U.S. presidents would be more appealing than heroes of the West. I want to create a monument so inspiring that people from all over America will be drawn to come and look and go home better citizens, he said. Soon, President Calvin Coolidge and others were helping secure federal funding. It took more than 14 years for Borglum and 400 workers to blast and chisel this world-famous quartet of former presidents. George Washington came first, his familiar profile emerging from the mountain in less than 3 years, in time for an especially patriotic dedication on July 4th, 1930. Thomas Jefferson followed, in a spot to Washington's right, but unstable stone there forced Borglum to dynamite his original Jefferson and move the third president to Washington's left. Jefferson's revised image received its dedication in 1936. Lincoln came next, in a spot originally intended for a giant tablet inscribed with an inspirational text. Then, all hands turned to adding Teddy Roosevelt to the group. After Borglum died, his son Lincoln oversaw the carving of the final details. On October 31st, 1941, just 14 years after work began, the monument was declared complete. Today, evidence of the enormous effort it took to do the job can still be seen here. When all was said and done, 800 million pounds of rock had been removed, from the fine chisel marks on the president's faces to the orderly lines of scars left on the surrounding stone by dynamite and drills, to the enormous piles of rubble below. In 1959, the monument provided the setting for 2 of Hollywood's most infamous moments in Alfred Hitchcock's classic thriller, North by Northwest. In one key scene, Hitch has icy blonde Eva Marie Saint pretend to shoot leading man Cary Grant in the visitor center. Then, he sends Grant, Saint, and villain Martin Landau on a deadly chase across the president's faces. Hitchcock was planning to shoot this second scene on the monument itself, but a journalist spilled news of the planned chase, and the National Park Service shut Hitchcock down, which is why the final scene was filmed on a Hollywood soundstage instead. Nebraska's biggest city. A place once famous for liquor, brothels, and gambling, but is now celebrated as the home of a visionary investor known as the Oracle of Omaha. Fly over the city of Omaha, Nebraska today, and you'd never know that it's home to one of the biggest and richest companies in America. That's because its headquarters aren't covered with a giant corporate logo. This plain-looking office tower is home to Berkshire Hathaway, the $430 billion company founded by a man known as the Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett. He's one of the most successful investors in history and got his start right here in town. Buffett grew up in this small white house on Barker Avenue. From a young age, he proved he had a knack for investing. He used to buy Coca-Cola from his grandparents' grocery store and then sell it for a profit. He would later go on to become Coca-Cola's biggest shareholder. In high school, he invested in a tenant farm and ended up making more money than his teachers did. Then, at 25, he launched his own investment firm with $100,000 in capital. Today, Buffett's personal net worth is over $50 billion. But he still lives in a house he bought for about $31,000 in 1958, which he claims is one of his best investments ever. In 2006, Buffett revealed plans to give his multi-billion-dollar fortune to charity, the biggest gift of its kind in U.S. history. When Warren Buffett was born in 1930, Omaha was undergoing big change. For more than 30 years, it had been ruled by a notorious crime boss named Tom Dennison, whose nickname was the Old Gray Wolf. Dennison had arrived in Omaha in 1892 with $35,000, which he turned into a fortune controlling the city's thriving prostitution, gambling, and bootlegging businesses right up until the 1930s. In 1932, Dennison was charged with conspiracy, but a jury was unable to decide on a verdict, and the case was declared a mistrial. By the time the Old Gray Wolf died in 1934, new reforms were cleaning up Omaha. One symbol of the new city was a newspaper called the Omaha Star. It was launched by Mildred Brown in 1938 as Omaha's first black newspaper. Brown wanted her paper to focus on positive news in Omaha's growing African-American community. She named it the Star because she saw it as a guiding light for many African-Americans who, like her, had traveled up from the South with the Great Migration to seek freedom and opportunity in northern cities like Omaha. The Star is still being published today out of its original offices here at 24th and Grand, directly across the street from another Omaha landmark. Starting in the 1920s, this red brick building was the heart of Omaha's thriving music scene. Inside was the famous Dreamland Ballroom. On any given night, eager fans lined up outside, hoping for a chance to see some of the nation's greatest jazz musicians, including Duke Ellington, Nat King Cole, Louis Armstrong, and Count Basie. Even before the Wright brothers took off in their first plane, Kansans were already dreaming of flight. The first efforts at manned flight in the state date back to the late 1800s. The first commercially produced airplane in the United States made its debut over Wichita in 1920. By the end of the decade, groundbreaking Wichita aviation pioneer Lloyd Stearman was designing biplanes like these, and designing them so well that almost 90 years later, they're still taking wing. But in the 1920s and 30s, Stearman wasn't the Kansan aviator making the biggest headlines around the world. That honor went to Amelia Earhart, a fearless aviatrix born here in Atchison, in her grandmother's white frame house. Earhart spent much of her childhood in this home. Perhaps its perch high above the Missouri River is what inspired her to dream of taking flight. Her dream came true in 1921 when she bought her first plane and quickly claimed the title of the first female pilot to ascend to 14,000 feet. She would go on to worldwide fame as the first woman to fly across the Atlantic, the first to do it alone, and the first pilot of either gender to fly solo from Honolulu to Oakland and from Mexico City to Newark. But Earhart's dreams of airborne glory came to a mysterious end on July 2nd, 1937. She disappeared over the Pacific during an attempt to become the first female pilot to fly around the world. Today, she and her adventurous spirit are commemorated just outside Atchison in this massive earthwork by Kansan artist Stan Hurd. Hurd used tractors, plows, lawnmowers, and weed whackers to prepare the ground for this 1-acre portrait. Then, he handcrafted Earhart's profile from 50 tons of stone and planted 500 rug junipers and other plants to fill in her goggles and helmet. All to create an earthbound memorial to a high-flying Kansan, which, appropriately enough, is appreciated best from the air. Today, a lot of Kansans have the chance to see it, thanks to an aviation heritage reaching back to pioneers like Earhart and Lloyd Stearman. In 1929, Stearman sold his Wichita factory to Boeing. Over the next 2 decades, it would go on to build thousands of the biplanes he had designed. Long after production ended, Stearman's sturdy craft still serve as everything from crop dusters to stunt planes. A Stearman biplane even played a starring role in one of Hollywood's most iconic moments, the attempt to murder Cary Grant in a cornfield in Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest. But Boeing didn't buy Stearman's factory just to get their hands on his little biplane. The company wanted to expand his plant and use it to build giant commercial and military aircraft. Boeing grew into an international aviation powerhouse and one of the biggest employers in town. But it was just one of many companies making planes here in those days. So many that in 1929, the Aeronautical Chamber of Commerce of the U.S. named Wichita the Air Capital City. I like the way the hills tumble to the waterfront and the way the wind blows around the grain elevators. The train yards go on forever, too. It's old age industrial. That's what it is. Those are the words of one of America's greatest cultural icons. A Minnesota boy named Bob Zimmerman, who grew up in Duluth's Hillside District and went on to become the musical genius known as Bob Dylan. He was born at St. Mary's Hospital in 1941, and for the first 6 years of his life, lived in the second-story flat of this now green-roofed clapboard house. At the age of 4, he was already filling the house with music, and later sang at family gatherings. In 1959, when he was 17, he went to see rock legend Buddy Holly perform here at the historic Duluth Armory. It was one of Holly's final performances, just 3 days before he died in a plane crash in Iowa. In the packed auditorium, the 17-year-old Zimmerman was right in the front row. That night would prove to be a key inspiration for his career. Not long after the Armory show, Bob was on to the big city of Minneapolis. His time here transformed him. After enrolling at the University of Minnesota, he moved into the student neighborhood known as Dinkytown. It was a mix of students and counterculture types. A local beatnik poet lent Bob a copy of Woody Guthrie's autobiography, and he was surrounded by American folk music, which was coming back into vogue. Something clicked. He traded in his electric guitar for an acoustic one and began singing in coffee houses under the new stage name, Bob Dylan. "You call yourself what you want to call yourself," he later said. "This is the land of the free." A famous movie ghost once looked around an Iowa cornfield and asked if he was in heaven. A lot of folks in Iowa would answer yes. They know that in America's 29th state, the possibilities can be as endless as the sky. It's a place where fertile fields stretch to the horizon, magnificent animals still roam, and surprises await. In Iowa, people work hard, play hard, and have been even known to rock hard in a place where the music died, when 3 of America's rock legends met their tragic fate in an Iowa field. Today, young writers flock to an Iowa farmhouse to create prize-winning works. Young scientists find new ways to feed our growing world. And followers of a famous Indian guru gather under giant golden domes to seek enlightenment and inner peace, while another gleams above one of the nation's most stunning capitals. It was here in Iowa that Hollywood turned a steamy romance ripped from the pages of one of the most popular novels of modern times into an Oscar-nominated movie, and transformed one family's fields of corn into a field of dreams. But Iowans don't need outsiders to tell them their fields are full of promise. All they have to do is look around, and it's plain to see this is Iowa. The University of Missouri, popularly known as Mizzou, was the first state university in the Louisiana Purchase Territory. Founded in 1839 here in Columbia. Mizzou's storied past is best symbolized by these 6 columns in the center of campus. They once belonged to the school's oldest building, which burned down in 1892 after an engineer switched on 400 light bulbs for a campus event. They had been wired 10 years earlier by students who were helping electrify the campus for the very first time. But the disaster had a silver lining. The University of Missouri decided to build 6 new buildings that now surround the columns and contain many of the departments for which Mizzou is now famous, including the oldest school of journalism in the world. Many famous names have walked its halls here in the corner of the quad. Long before playwright Tennessee Williams wrote A Streetcar Named Desire and The Glass Menagerie, he studied journalism at Mizzou. That is, until his father took him out of school and made him work in a shoe factory instead. Missouri native Brad Pitt was a journalism major, but decided to head off to Hollywood just a few credits short of earning his degree. Other famous Mizzou grads include Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, and Mad Men's John Hamm. But they are just a few of the big names that have called Missouri home. They include talk show host Rush Limbaugh, a Missouri native, and a young animator whose inspiration for Mickey Mouse came while working here in colorful Kansas City. There's nothing in Wisconsin quite like this. A finger of land surrounded by water that remains one of the most remote and beautiful places in the nation. It's called the Door Peninsula and stretches out 82 miles northeast from Green Bay, like the jagged blade of a knife reaching right up to the Michigan border. Once, ships carrying Wisconsin timber had to travel all the way around the peninsula to bring that timber to ports like Chicago and Detroit. It was such a dangerous passage, it was known as Death's Door, which was how the Door Peninsula got its name. Over the centuries, hundreds of vessels shipwrecked in these shoal-filled waters. But in the 1870s, businessmen dug a giant canal across the Door Peninsula to shorten the route to Green Bay from Lake Michigan. Today, it's managed by the Army Corps of Engineers and is home to one of the last great industries still in operation on the Great Lakes, the Bay Shipbuilding Company in the town of Sturgeon Bay. Here, highly skilled crews are kept busy repairing and building vessels of all sizes. When their shifts end, the workers head home to life in one of the most idyllic spots in the U.S. Etched by a rocky and weather-beaten coastline on 3 sides, the Door Peninsula seems magically removed from the rest of the world. Thinning to less than 2 miles at its northern tip, it's full of old farms, wineries, and golden fields of wheat. But the threats to ships on Lake Michigan are still very real, which is why the peninsula is home to a magnificent collection of historic lighthouses, 11 in all. They're strung like bright pearls around its neck. One of the most dramatic is this one. The Cana Island Lighthouse soars over the eastern side of the peninsula and is one of the most recognized landmarks in all of Wisconsin. First lit in 1870, Cana Island Light still serves as a navigational aid, though its antique glass lens is now automated and computer-controlled. The Willis Tower. It shoots up more than 1/4 of a mile into the sky. When it was completed in 1973, it was called the Sears Tower and was the tallest building in the world. It later lost that title, but maintained its place as the highest structure in the U.S. until 2014, when New York City's One World Trade Center opened its doors and topped the Willis Tower by almost 50 feet. Chicago is not the ideal place to build a megastructure like this one. The ground under this city is actually soft clay, which caused some early buildings here to sink in the mud. Chicago City Hall was one of them and had to be torn down. But architects and engineers here were persistent. By the time the Willis Tower was built, they knew they had to drill more than 100 piles deep down through the clay until they hit bedrock. So the towers above would have something solid to rest on, and so they wouldn't topple over. The Willis Tower was also constructed with a tubular design. But instead of just being one very tall tube, it was engineered as 9 different tubes, bundled together. It's what gives the Willis Tower its unique block-like shape. The center and largest tube is the tallest. One reason it gets narrower as it rises is so there's less surface area at higher elevations that could make the structure unstable in high winds. But still, on stormy days in the windy city of Chicago, the highest floors of the Willis Tower can sway as much as 3 feet. And that's another reason why stepping out into one of its sky boxes on the 103rd floor is such a thrill. It's said that every resident in the state is less than 85 miles from one of 4 of America's Great Lakes. Erie in the southeast, Huron to its east, Superior to the north, or Michigan on its west coast. Once, this area was covered by a great sheet of ice called the Wisconsin Glacier. After that ice melted, roughly 14,000 years ago, Paleo-Indians arrived. They hunted mastodons and mammoths, caribou and beaver. More recently, descendants of these early tribes explored the area's waterways in dugout canoes, fishing the many inlets that still line Michigan's coast today. From the air, this is as varied a shoreline as any in North America. Endless beaches, remote pine forests that reach right down to the water, miles of marsh, and a giant wall of sand towering above Lake Michigan. It's called Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore and is often ranked among the nation's tallest sand dunes. But that's not quite accurate. This isn't a typical dune. The sand on its surface actually rests atop a bluff of rock and gravel left by a glacier, which is why it's called a perched dune. But scientists say that it may not be perched here for long. Westerly winds off Lake Michigan are moving Sleeping Bear Dune inland at an average rate of 2 feet per year. It's 450 feet high from top to bottom. Climbing back up can be hard work. Pulitzer Prize-winning author Carl Sandburg has said that these dunes are to the Midwest what the Grand Canyon is to Arizona and the Yosemite to California, a signature of time and eternity. Every Memorial Day for more than 100 years, thousands have flocked to the city of Indianapolis to take part in one of the greatest spectacles in professional sports. This city isn't just the state capital, it's also the racing capital of the world. Home of the legendary Indianapolis 500. When race day arrives, hundreds of thousands pack these bleachers at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, waiting to hear the words, "Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines." That's the signal for the 33 Indy 500 drivers to fire up their cars, put pedal to the metal, and kick off what's known as the greatest spectacle in racing. Specially designed IndyCar race cars can reach speeds of more than 230 miles per hour. They're some of the fastest cars in the world. The first 500-mile race was run here in 1911 and drew 90,000 people. They cheered on Ray Haroon as he roared to victory in his bright yellow and black Marmon Wasp, a car that he helped design and build right here in Indianapolis. Haroon averaged 75 miles per hour. A few things have changed since that first race besides the top speeds. The crowd has grown to about 300,000, and now millions more watch on TV. And the purse has ballooned from around $30,000 to more than $14 million. These sandy shores mark Ohio's northern border on Lake Erie. The waters of this lake may be peaceful today, but in the early 19th century, they were filled with battleships, cannons ablaze, during one of the most important naval battles in United States history. It all happened in the waters off South Bass Island, which now lies just south of the Canadian border. In 1812, war broke out between Britain and the U.S. That same year, British forces captured Detroit. The U.S. Navy feared that Lake Erie could be next. Then, on September 10, 1813, 6 British warships sailed towards South Bass Island. Many feared it was part of a British plan to take complete control over Lake Erie. In response to the threat, 27-year-old United States Navy Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry rushed his fleet into action, here in a place called Put-in Bay. At first, the southwest winds worked against Perry's fleet. The British ships fired heavily on Perry's ship, the USS Lawrence, killing or wounding nearly all of his crew. Desperate and on the verge of defeat, Perry decided to risk it all. In a small skiff and under fire, he rowed to his nearest fighting ship, the Niagara, and climbed on board. Then, Perry and his men sailed the Niagara straight towards the British fleet. The winds changed, and so did Perry's luck. 2 British ships became entangled and were unable to maneuver in defense. Almost immediately, the British surrendered. In a span of just 20 minutes, Perry had gone from facing certain death to capturing every British vessel. Lake Erie was now safely in American hands. Today, a memorial to Perry's victory soars 350 feet over the site of the battle. With the British threat removed, Ohio's focus turned to trade. $80 million years ago, these rugged badlands in western Kansas were under a vast inland sea. Billions of creatures lived and died here, then left their bodies on the ocean floor in ancient layers of chalk. With the sea's retreat, erosion washed most of the chalk away, leaving beautiful and evocative towers behind. This group is known as Monument Rocks. Though too soft and unstable to attract climbers, these impressive monoliths tower over the plains as seemingly eternal reminders of the state's vast geological past. But they aren't as timeless as they seem. This lonely outcropping was named Castle Rock in 1865 by frontier scout Julian Fitch. For over 150 years, stage drivers, pioneers, and hikers used its towers to guide their path. Today, they might have trouble finding their way. Castle Rock and the rest of Kansas's chalk towers and canyons are slowly crumbling in the wind and rain. it's just a matter of time until flat Kansas prairie is all that's left here. A prairie made of chalk. There's another awe-inspiring form in Missouri. One that's made St. Louis one of the most easily recognized cities in the world. Its stunning Gateway Arch. Just one glance at the arch on the banks of the Mississippi River, and everyone knows this is St. Louis. More than half a century after it was built, it remains one of the nation's great engineering marvels. It was born from economic chaos. In the 1930s, during the Depression, unemployment rates in St. Louis were high. So city officials started looking for ways for St. Louis to get its hands on some of the federal cash being handed out under the New Deal. They managed to convince President Roosevelt and New Deal officials to fund a new riverfront park and memorial to President Thomas Jefferson and his leading role in America's westward expansion. St. Louis then launched a design competition for a new memorial on the site. The winner was a Finnish-American architect and designer named Eero Saarinen. His monumental arch seemed the perfect symbol of the opening up of the West and a way to frame the growing city of St. Louis. It took 900 million tons of stainless steel to build. Reportedly, the largest order of stainless steel in U.S. history. On October 28, 1965, thousands of excited St. Louis residents gathered below as a team of daring steelworkers hoisted themselves up to the top of the arch and then welded the final section of steel into place. Saarinen's engineering marvel was complete. It's now considered a major world monument. Its price tag of $13 million was a huge amount of money for a city like St. Louis to spend on a structure that had no practical use. That's one reason the arch is much more than a memorial. It's a powerful symbol of a unique time in the nation when political power and public funds worked together to build soaring monuments that affirmed America's leading place in the world. For the people of St. Louis, the Gateway Arch has given them an indelible brand. And looking back through Saarinen's upside-down catenary curve today, it remains a gateway to the West, just as St. Louis once was more than 2 centuries ago. Arms crossed, gazing out over his former land, is a figure known as the Eternal Indian. A light on his chest illuminates his face against the trees at night. Taft's 48-foot-high sculpture was completed in 1911 as a tribute to all the Native Americans who once called Illinois home. Over time, it's come to be associated with a Sauk leader known as Black Hawk. The battles he and his people fought with the U.S. government to keep their land here on the Rock River are famously known as the Black Hawk War. One of the most important battles happened here in the state's northwest corner, near the present-day city of Galena. In the 1820s, Galena boomed when lead was discovered in the region. Other settlements were soon established nearby, including one at a place called Apple River. In the spring of 1829, members of the Sauk and Fox tribes returned from their winter hunts to discover that the miners had taken over their villages. The tribes were forced to resettle on land on the west side of the Mississippi. But in 1832, Black Hawk and hundreds of members of the tribes crossed back over the Mississippi to try to reoccupy their land. When miners in Apple River heard the news, they raced to build a fortified wall around their cabins for protection. Their Apple River fort has since been reconstructed. On June 24, 1832, Black Hawk and about 200 warriors arrived and then attacked the fort. But the miners and their wives fired back, and after 45 minutes, Black Hawk decided to give up, thinking he was outgunned. Almost 6 weeks later, the chief and his people suffered a final horrifying defeat when U.S. forces chased them into the waters of the Mississippi and then fired on them at will, slaughtering hundreds of their men, women, and children in what came to be known as the Bad Axe Massacre. Black Hawk was one of the few survivors and later died of illness in Iowa. Today, Laredo Taft's sculpture stands as an impressive reminder of what happened to Black Hawk and his people here in Western Illinois. In his final speech before he died, Black Hawk said, "Rock River was beautiful country. I loved my towns, my cornfields, and the home of my people. It is yours now. Keep it as we did." The year after the Black Hawk War ended, the city of Chicago was incorporated on the shores of Lake Michigan, and Illinois was about to undergo its transformation from a series of frontier outposts to one of the most powerful states in the nation. With its rolling hills and open plains, Ohio offers plenty of places to carve out one's own community, even for celebrities with a cult-like status. Roughly 70 miles northeast of Columbus lies an idyllic spot called Malabar Farm. Here, surrounded by forests and fields, creative minds have found a place to return to nature, surround themselves with the season's natural beauty, and write a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel or two. Author Louis Bromfield lived here at Malabar Farm in the 1940s and 50s. But he was often not alone. Hollywood's biggest stars at the time considered the farm an ideal getaway. Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart were married here in 1945. At the time, it was the tabloid's most sensational story. Errol Flynn, Dorothy Lamour, Clark Gable, and others soon flocked here. But even stars had to work on the farm, thanks to Bromfield's passion for sustainable agriculture. Some locals remember seeing James Cagney selling vegetables at the farm's produce stand. Although the stars have since moved on to other glamorous getaways, Malabar Farm has yet another intriguing link to Hollywood. Hidden in the trees, this small cabin on the property may not look like much, but it's where the powerful opening scene of The Shawshank Redemption was filmed. Starring Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman, the film follows a banker accused of murder, his sometimes brutal imprisonment, and his inspiring friendship with a fellow inmate. Much of the rest of the movie was filmed nearby, at the Ohio State Reformatory. This castle-like facility was built in 1896 and closed in 1990. That's when Hollywood saw an opportunity. The gloomy Romanesque architecture provided the perfect setting for Shawshank. From the moment character Andy Dufresne walks through the prison yard on his way to see the warden, to his brutal stint in solitary confinement, the prison plays the role of the ultimate antagonist. The facility's goal is to break the spirits of all who enter its gates. Yet Andy does not give up hope, and his unflagging faith in freedom encourages those around him who'd long ago been broken. The film's most iconic scene takes place under an oak tree nearby. It's beneath this tree's heavy boughs where Morgan Freeman's character, Red, digs up a buried message and realizes it's time to either get busy living or get busy dying. Severe winds nearly took down the tree in 2011, but true to the film's message of hope and survival, a good part of the oak still stands tall. For now, its most serious threats may come from movie buffs and tourists seeking out this legendary tree. Many fans of the film make a pilgrimage here to see the oak. So many that the tree's owner, a local attorney, felt the need to fence it in.